Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits, navigating our way through a lackluster sports month as we inch closer to September. But I'm glad you stopped by so I could fill you in on all that's going on in the world of sports, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Friday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And speaking of this past Friday, if you haven't listened to it, please do so. Not only on Apple, Spotify, jreels.com, as well as the YouTube channel at JReels. Keith McPherson of WFAN, an hour-long conversation with him as we unpack his journey in the broadcasting space, becoming a sports talk show host in his own right. And let me tell you something, it is inspirational, it is motivational, it is just a complete breakdown of what it takes to try to get yourself into this business and what hard work, perseverance, dedication, determination, when you add that all up, it pretty much gives you what Keith has experienced and what he has gone through in order to become what he is today. So you definitely want to peep that. I'd appreciate it if you go back in the archives just a few days ago so you don't have that far to go back. And then on top of that, real quick, drinkolipop.com. I've been talking about it for weeks. Summer is still in effect. We have to beat the heat somehow, and the best way to do it is to drink something that's actually good for your gut with prebiotics, also with ingredients that you can actually pronounce, no high fructose corn syrup, none of the garbage that you're accustomed to in drinking the regular soft drinks that are out there, and with all the different flavors. Yes, if you're a classic person, if you like vintage cola and lemon lime and ginger ale and cream and root beer, yes, they have those, but for the summer, they have watermelon lime, they have banana cream, they have peaches and cream. They have strawberry vanilla. Yes, run the whole gamut when it comes to flavors. And they even have assorted packs. So you don't have to just stick to one particular flavor if you want to try multiple. So if you go to drinkolipop.com, DRINKOLIP as in Paul, OP as in Paul.com, you can save 15% off your order by using the promo code JReels at checkout. So please give them a look, buy a case, buy a couple, buy a dozen. For your friends, family, frenemies, foes, no matter who is on your to-do list. So please go ahead, drinkolipop.com, save 15%, 15 off your order by using the promo code JReels, and I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate it. All right, now that we got that out of the way, let's get right to it. I know we're going through a period here in sports where, again, the dead zone, and we still have a few weeks to the NFL season, even college football for that matter. And we would think things will start to pick up a little bit in certain areas. I know we have the U.S. Open, which is 2 weeks from today, I believe. No, maybe 3 weeks. I should know this off the top of my head. No, actually 2 weeks from today. So that's one we will certainly sink our teeth into when we get to that point. But baseball, as we know, is going to carry us here pretty much through the end of the month, maybe even into the early part of September as we get ready to raise the curtain on both college football and the NFL. And the first thing that's going to come out of this discussion, and we've talked about how the wild card race in the National League is going to be tooth and nail, the battle royale, everything that I discussed here over the last few weeks. Well, now there's been some separation to the point where if you're the New York Mets, and they're going to be the focal point here, and I know people are saying, oh boy, here goes J Reels now talking about his beloved Mets. Is he going to be on the ledge? We're going to have to pull him off so he doesn't have to jump. No, I'm not going to go to that extreme. But I will say that because of what has taken place here, especially with both the San Diego Padres and the Arizona Diamondbacks, and those teams have really put themselves a little bit of distance ahead of Atlanta, ahead of course, the Mets, St. Louis, and a few other teams that I'll get to. But because of the torrid streak that both of those teams are on, and we talked about how San Diego going into the weekend in Miami, now they lost the game yesterday, but they did win the first two, so they went back to Southern California with another series victory in their back pocket. And for Arizona, who had a big 4-game series against the Philadelphia Phillies at home, and although they lost the first game there on Thursday, but from that point on, they just blitzed the Phillies out of the desert and back to the city of brotherly love, because Arizona now getting reinforcements back. They got Merrill Kelly to pitch yesterday, who had been on the shelf for 4 months with a shoulder injury, and now with him being back in the fold, and then when you look at San Diego, at some point they're going to get Yu Darvish, Joe Musgrove back to bolster that rotation, and we know that their bullpen has been fortified right before the trade deadline to the tune where now they have a 3.5 and even 4-game lead over the Mets, even bigger than that, come to think of it. Because the Braves currently have the final wild card spot in the National League. So as of right this moment, they are 4.5 games back of both San Diego and Arizona. And those two teams, we're going to have to keep in mind here because I'm going to talk about them at the back half because this ties in with the Mets. And with the Braves, who have been scuffling and struggling and got swept by Milwaukee, and they were just able to eke out a series in Colorado where they actually lost 2 out of 3. And they won the middle game of that series, and now they got to go to San Francisco for 4 games. And don't look now, but the Giants are part of this wild card mix. But as it pertains to the Mets, and yes, I had to get all that out there before I get to New York. Now, you wonder what happened up in the Pacific Northwest this weekend. Now, mind you, they did win the game last Monday in St. Louis after losing 2 out of 3 in Anaheim. I know, big question mark there, but they did win that game in St. Louis where they shut out the Cardinals and they went to Colorado, losing the first game before winning the back 2. And what started out as a road trip that was 4-3, going to Seattle, that if they just won 1 game, they would have come back to New York at 500. You would have had the dust settle on a long road trip and have now a 9-game homestand where they're going to play the A's for 3 starting tomorrow, followed by Miami and then Baltimore before going on a 10-game road trip, which I will certainly pinpoint in a moment. But for the Mets to just not only show up, they might as well just got on the plane from Colorado and come back to New York, because what you saw there in Seattle over the weekend, not only were they sleepless, but they were pretty much scoreless. Other than a measly Jeff McNeil home run in last night's game, that was the only run that they were able to scratch over 27 innings. So for Seattle, who we understand they're offensively challenged, not this weekend if you saw what they did, shutting out the Mets 6-0, 4-0, and then 12-1 on Sunday Night Baseball, ESPN. So now you have to wonder, just a smidge. I get it that the Braves, the sky's falling in Atlanta, and even though the Padres and Diamondbacks have gotten a little separation and the Mets are going to be pretty much in a rock fight from here on out, depending on what they're going to do here over the course of these next 3 weeks, because to me, these next 3 weeks are going to be their season. And we talked about the homestand, as we know, and we could talk about how they're pitching. I'm not going to say it's starting to fall apart, but you wonder if they're springing leaks. Their starting rotation, which surprisingly, throughout this big run up until what we saw there in Seattle, they have pieced it together. Sean Manaea has pitched well, of course, the last start notwithstanding. And Luis Severino, he's starting to now become a bit of a question mark to wonder whether or not he's hit the wall here in 2024. And we could talk about Paul Blackburn, who's going to go up against his former mates tomorrow as the series opens up against Oakland. But what Blackburn's going to give you may be key, may be even imperative in order for the Mets to stay afloat here in this wild card race. Not to put it all on him, but they brought him here for a reason. And when we take a look at this team, they have not hit, as we know, here over the last few days. And even though they were going to cool off, considering a couple weeks back where they were just hitting the ball out of the ballpark and scoring runs in bunches and winning games and getting themselves to a point where they were actually in 6th place, or at least have that wild card spot, the final one in the National League. And granted that they're only a half game back. This isn't a situation where we have to really start to panic. But now with the schedule, although 9 games at home, and you have to wonder whether or not this team and their pitching staff, I know the bullpen is always going to be a crapshoot, but their starting pitching is going to have to give them something here, because we understand we cannot rely on their bullpen. We get it that the Mets aren't going to score 5 and 6 runs at a clip, but we would only hope that if they're going to be in this race in August and into September, that they could start getting their bats going, because I cannot trust this pitching 100%. And when we take a look at the landscape here, we know about the homestand, but after this 9-game stretch, and hopefully they could with Oakland and Miami. And Oakland could actually play because they have a pretty good offense. And Miami, I get it. They could always be a thorn in the Mets side, as evidenced after the All-Star break where they split those 4 games down near South Beach. But after that, they got the Orioles coming in, and the Orioles have been hit or miss here recently. But then that's where the gauntlet begins. They had a 10-game road trip, as I mentioned. Now they have to follow that up, sandwiched in between this 9-game homestand, with another 10-game road trip. And do you know where this takes them? Another West Coast trip, at least for the first 7 games. 4 in San Diego, 3 in Arizona. Before going to Chicago to play the White Sox for 3 more. And if the Mets do not win at least 2 out of those games, and really, let's think about it, they should actually sweep that series. But again, these are the Mets. They need a huge 7 games. And I get it that that's for down the road. That's for a week from this coming Thursday when we discuss it on the podcast and really get the forecast and take the temperature of what this team will be after these 9 games at home. But I'm bringing this up now because before we could look at them coming home and we would think that, all right, long road trip, they didn't play well at the back end there. Yes, they probably could have won another game out in Anaheim there, especially that Sunday night game. And think about it. They had back-to-back Sunday night games, both against AL West opponents. But anyway, I digress. For the Mets now, it's all right in front of them. And let's see how they're going to fare here against some lesser opponents, especially for the first 2 series. They have to win minimum 4 out of those games before the Orioles come in, and we'll take the look at that series a week from today. But right now, the Mets, hopefully with the day off today, they could regroup, get away from baseball, don't have to worry about having to get to the ballpark and get themselves acclimated back home. They will have 24 hours to do so. And hopefully that day off will certainly be the panacea to cure whatever ills that they had on the back end of this road trip. So that's where we're going to start there, especially with the wild card scenario, because for Arizona and what they've done, like I mentioned, Merrill Kelly now back in the fold, and Arizona, they have been just otherworldly in this last, 4 or 5 weeks? Same for the Padres for that matter. And just like I mentioned, the reinforcements that those 2 teams are getting back, more so Padres because we're still waiting on Darvish and Musgrove, but for Kelly to be back in the rotation and for Arizona, everything's clicking there. And you would think that's going to be a battle to see who's going to get the home field advantage. Because if the season were to end today, San Diego will go to Arizona in a wild card situation. And even though they're both tied, I get it that they're both 66 and 53, but I guess Arizona has the tiebreaker with the regular season series to date. But that's one we're going to have to take a look at when we move ahead in the baseball calendar to see where the dust would settle between those 2 teams. But right now, they're going to fight it out for that 4th seed and home field in the wild card. But as far as the Braves, and they have really just fallen apart here. Now they got to go to San Francisco, and I mentioned them a minute ago because now they're 2 games over 500. They have actually played very well. They've won 7 of the last 10. Remember, they were about 3 or 4 games under 500 as early as a couple of weeks ago. And here they are now just a couple of games over. Sandwiched in between are the Cardinals. Now, the Cardinals have a couple of games in hand on the Giants, so that bodes well for them. But the Cards, you can forget about the division as the Brewers are going to just go into the postseason in roller skates, and we'll get through the divisions in a second. But for Atlanta, New York, St. Louis, and San Francisco, and I get it that the Cubs are 3 back, 1 game under, and that's what's weird. Because even with them, I'm not going to include the Reds and Pirates as of right this moment, because the Pirates have certainly fallen flat on their face here as of late, and they're going to play the Padres to start off the week there tonight in San Diego. And the Reds, another team that, yes, I get it, even though they are just 4 games under and 4.5 back, they are still within striking distance, but get the 500 first before we could really consider them a threat, dare I say, in the National League wild card. But you still have those teams on the periphery, but it's going to be those 4 teams as of right this second. And of course, anything could change at the drop of a hat. Atlanta, New York, St. Louis, and San Francisco, 4 teams for 1 spot, which looks like that's going to be the case from here on out. Unless Arizona and San Diego cool off considerably to the point where they come back to the pack. And remember, right after the All-Star break, you had 8 teams fighting it out for, in essence, 3 spots. And now it looks like you're going to have 4 teams for 1 spot. So that's what you have with the National League wild card, which is still going to be fast and furious, and it's still going to probably go down to the wire, but we could cut a lot of those teams out of the mix. And even though with some that are on the fringe, but still, I think those are going to be the 4 teams standing, at least once we get toward the end of the month and into September. Now, as far as the American League goes, with the wild card, I know you've had some interesting developments there. Now, we know Seattle and Houston, they are tied at the top of the division. But with the Astros getting a tiebreaker, Seattle is in the wild card hunt, 2.5 games behind the Royals for the final spot in the American League wild card. We know that the Yankees currently have a 4-game lead over the Twins, and I'm going to get to the Twins in a second. We know that the Orioles and Yankees are tied, although the Orioles have the advantage with the head-to-head matchup in the regular season. But either one of those teams, they could either parachute to get that wild card to where they'll host at home, but I'm sure they'd rather win a division so they can have the bye. And even though that's been dangerous over the years, last couple in particular, as we know, but for the Yankees and Orioles, they'll be fine unless barring just an epic collapse on either one of those 2 teams. But the Twins, they got off to a great start this weekend. They swept that doubleheader on Friday against the Guardians, and you thought that if they could just get one more, they would be 1 game back of the division lead there in the loss and 1.5 back in the AL Central. But as it was, the Guardians showed their mettle. They won those back 2 games in Minnesota to keep it to where it's at 3.5 and 3 in the loss in the division. So no harm, no foul for Cleveland. But I know Minnesota, they certainly had a great shot to potentially sweep or at least get another game to make it 3 out of 4 to gain 2 games in the standings. But they blew that. But as it is right now, they are a half game ahead of the Royals in the wild card chase. So at least they have that going for them, even though the division would be nicer because they could have a possibility, even probability to even get a bye when it's all said and done. But as it is right now, they are fixated on the wild card. And then after that, we talked about Seattle, but then you have the Red Sox who have really hit the skids here, and they had an awful weekend against the Astros at home as they got swept. And now you have to wonder whether or not the Red Sox are starting to run out of gas here. And again, you still have plenty of time. And the Red Sox have shown a lot of mettle and a lot of intestinal fortitude here, despite the fact that their starting pitching is a big giant question mark. And even though their offense, they've gotten it in moments here. And you had the episode with Duran yesterday, who had called another, or not a player, take that back, a fan in the crowd, an anti-gay slur, where through a statement, he profusely apologized, bad judgment, bad error on his part. All right, give him a pass, I guess, but certainly that was terrible and was shown there on the broadcast. But the Red Sox, let's see if they could turn it around, and they're going to have to do it quick because with them being currently 3 games back and 3 in a loss, all right, not an insurmountable achievement, but still, 3 could become 5, could become 6, and therefore you've dug yourself that 6-foot grave to where pretty soon you may be throwing dirt on yourselves after that. And then you have the Rays 5.5. I know the Rays are trying to hang in there, and the Rays lost 2 out of 3 to the Orioles, although they did salvage the series there yesterday. But the wild cards in both leagues, more so in the American League, in the National League, I think it's a little bit more hotly contested. American League, you still have a little bit of a gap there between the Royals, who currently have the final spot, and then Seattle, Boston, etc. Now, Kansas City has played well here, and you got to give it up for what they've done. Now, is Kansas City going to be a team that is going to sustain themselves from now to the end of the year? Well, they're certainly showing that right now, and it's kudos to them. But I know a lot of people in their gut, especially who watch and follow baseball on a day-to-day basis. Granted, give them credit, but we always look to see where the shoe is going to drop, or at least the other shoe is going to drop, because we've never seen Kansas City in a scenario where they put themselves in a position where they could be in the postseason. And we understand there's still about 6.5 weeks left of this year. But do I fully trust them? I can't say I do. But one more time, you got to call it like you see it. So far, they've done well, and I got to take a look at the schedule to see where they fall I'm sure they still have some matchups there with Minnesota and the Guardians, and who knows, they got to go to Yankee Stadium at some point here over the course of the remainder of the season. So they're going to have some challenges here from now until we get to the end of September. But that's what you have there with the divisions. As far as with the wild cards, as far as the divisions go, we know about the AL East and the AL West. Astros have by 1 percentage point, and they actually have 2 games in hand on Seattle. So that's something to think about when we look ahead to see when the Astros will catch up on those 2 games. And they may have Justin Verlander coming back, considering he's already pitching in a rehab start. I believe pitched yesterday. Fared okay, nothing crazy. But for him, it's just about getting his timing back with that neck injury. He's been on the shelf there, I believe, since the end of June. So let's see for this home stretch. It's going to be key for the Astros to get Verlander back. So that's going to be a huge boost for them. And then we talked about the Guardians and Twins, how they're just separated by 3 in the loss, and Minnesota certainly had a golden opportunity to at least get 2 games, if not sweep, there after that doubleheader on Friday. And then in the National League, the Phillies, boy, have they just, what happened to them? Phillies, where they had the best record in the sport, and you can even go back to the series against the Yankees a couple of weeks ago, and they got swept by them, and then they go on a 10-game road trip in their own right. And what happens? They get the beatdown, smackdown, a just brutal road trip for them, where they did win 2 out of 3 in LA. But as I mentioned earlier, with the red-hot Diamondbacks, they won that first game, and then they just got spanked by Arizona for the remainder of that series, including 12-1 and 12-5, I believe, yesterday there in the desert. So now they come home with their tail between their legs. And even though they still have a sizable lead, 7 in the loss, 7.5 ahead of the Braves and 8 ahead of the Mets, but they certainly put themselves in a position where now between them, even the Milwaukee Brewers, who, like I mentioned, 8 games in a loss and 7.5 over the Cardinals, they should cruise to a division title. And then in the West, we know about Arizona and San Diego, but for the Dodgers, who had a good weekend in their own right, sweeping the Pirates and maybe putting them out the pasture as far as the National League wildcard goes. But the Dodgers, Phillies, 69-49, and the Brewers are 67-50. So when we look at those 3 teams, they're going to duke it out to see who's going to have those top 2 seeds in the National League to get those buys. And that could be, not going to say it would be, but it could be crucial once you get into October to line up your pitching, to get some rest. And we understand that for those teams that have had big time years, all you got to do is look back to last year. And I've talked about this several times, and I'll throw it at you one more. When you look at the Dodgers and what they did last year, when you look at the Baltimore Orioles winning 101 games and the AL East, and you also look at another team like the Atlanta Braves, who went going away in the National League East. What happened to them? All 3 of those teams in the division series, after having the bye and 5 days off, those 3 teams combined for 1 win. And that was Atlanta winning game 2 over the Philadelphia Phillies in the division series, because the Dodgers got swept by Arizona and the Orioles got swept by the eventual World Series champion Texas Rangers. So when we look at the divisions, especially in the National League, not going to be as juicy as the American League, as we know. Shouldn't come down to the wire, although Dodgers, with what Arizona and San Diego has done, they're just 3 in the loss and 3.5 back for the top spot. 4 in the loss and 3.5 back. But for LA, we would think when it's all said and done, they should be fine. They'll probably eke out the division, but where they end up as far as having to host a wild card or maybe even have a bye, so where they won't have to even worry about that, certainly remains to be seen. So plenty of baseball, as we know. You know I'm going to discuss it ad infinitum from now until we get to and through the end of October. Not only once we get to October, but certainly postseason, etc. And as we take a look at the schedule this week, you have some interesting matchups, and you have a couple of 4-game series. I talked about Atlanta and San Francisco. That's a big 4-game series. LA at Milwaukee. There you go when it comes to tiebreakers. Because at the end of the season, if both teams have the same record, and because this is a 4-game series, and I'm sure they already played a 3-game series in LA this year, I'd have to go back and look at that. But because of the imbalance where if LA or Milwaukee, when it's all said and done, has a 4-3 advantage in the season series, well, they're going to have the tiebreaker if they do end up with the same record at the end of the year after 162 has been completed. So just keep that in mind. Big 4-game series there in Milwaukee between those two teams. Then, like I mentioned, Pittsburgh at San Diego as they're hanging on by a thread. Kansas City at Minnesota. Here we go. We talked about that, right? Kansas City, let's see if they could get closer to the Twins. And again, they're not separated by much, but that is a big series. Let me see if that's a 4-gamer. I should have known that off the top. So the Royals will have a big test here as they'll only play 3 games here upcoming in the Twin Cities. So that's a series I'm going to keep an eye on. So like I mentioned, some very good series here to start off your week. Certainly ones that you could circle and take a look at here. And as we look at the other series, Houston at Tampa Bay, as Houston tries to continue their winning streak down in the Panhandle, and Tampa, again, trying to hang on to that wild card. Texas at Boston. I'm not going to talk about the Rangers anymore. I don't care where they are right now, but they are certainly out to sea, and they have to have both Nathan Eovaldi, who got rocked by the Yankees there on Saturday, and Max Scherzer, no shock there. They had to go back to Texas for further evaluation on injuries that they've had. So they are literally a mass unit, and I don't expect any noise coming out of them. And until they get to 500, then maybe I'll bring them up then. But right now, out to sea. And other than that, yeah, you got the Yankees in Chicago, so they're going to pound on the White Sox for 3 days. Other than that, that's what you have. We know about Oakland at New York, St. Louis at Cincinnati, Seattle at Detroit, Miami at Philly, Chicago Cubs at Cleveland, Washington at Baltimore. So you got your Beltway series there for 2 days. That's the bulk of it. So you know the series that we're going to look at here one more time in closing on the baseball is going to be Dodgers, Brewers, Kansas City, Minnesota, Atlanta, San Francisco. Those are your big series there. Yeah, Houston, Tampa, all right, maybe a little bit. But other than that, those are the big series here as we get to the early part of this baseball week. Let me see if there's anything else there with baseball that I need to bring up here, discuss. Anything else that I jot down? Yeah, we talked about that. Guardians. Oh, a couple of quickies. The White Sox fired Pedro Grifol, as you saw there on Thursday. And is it all his fault? 100% not. But somebody's going to take the hit here and be the guy that's going to walk the plank. So why not be the manager? Grady Sizemore, the longtime Cleveland Indian back in the day, and also bounced around after that, Phillies, etc. He is the interim manager, so let's see what direction they go after that, because you don't think Sizemore is going to be the guy that's going to be inked on the dotted line as far as the long-term answer there for the White Sox. Then you have, speaking of LA, we may see Mookie Betts here early this week in Milwaukee, and will play right field. A lot of people thought maybe he'll come in at shortstop, but considering that they have some reinforcements there, whether your name is Ahmed Rosario, we know about Miguel Rojas, and obviously Gavin Lux, but for Betts, he'll probably go back to his natural position at right field, but who knows? I'm sure he'll get some spells there in the middle infield, so that will be a huge addition to the Dodgers as they try to even put some distance between them and the Padres and Diamondbacks. So that's a big news of note here early on this week, so we'll see when Mookie Betts will be back in the lineup. So that'll do it for baseball. Let me put on, I don't even know, I guess my running shoes. And Lord knows, I wish I could put on my running shoes considering I'm still mending from this broken foot that I suffered 3.5 weeks ago. But I say running shoes only because I think of track and field, etc., because now we can put a lid on the 2024 Olympic Games. And as I've talked about here over the last 2.5 weeks, and I get it, I'm not going to belabor the fact and hammer home how I didn't watch, how I couldn't gravitate or even get wrapped up in what had taken place over in Paris over the last 17, 18 days. And I'm not going to give an assessment or have a complete breakdown because that would be very contradictory to everything that I've espoused over the last 2.5 weeks. But a couple of things that I do want to discuss, and the first one being, and I get it as more basketball, and I mean, I understand it's not as symbolic as track and field, as gymnastics, as swimming, but the outrage, whether it's Stephen A. Smith, all right, his mom I can understand, Jayson Tatum's mom, God bless her, coming out saying, hey, is anything wrong? What's going on out in Paris? Why isn't my son playing where he didn't get any burn in the game against Serbia? And let's face it, you knew once the USA men's basketball team survived that game when they were down by 16 and had to outscore Serbia 32-15 in the final quarter in order to win. And I get it, Steph Curry, the hero, I would think MVP based on everything that I read because I did not watch a nanosecond of it. But of course, reading up and following up and just, I can't even escape it even if I tried. But back to Tatum for a second. Is it really that big of a deal that he didn't get any playing time against Serbia? And we understand there was going to be matchups and there's going to be, I hate to say it, a popularity contest as to who's going to get burned in these games as opposed to a guy that, yes, I get it, on the heels of winning an NBA title, another all-NBA first-team nod, etc. I am not in the least offended that Tatum didn't get to play in these games. And right, we could talk about the year that he had, and we could talk about the success and the Celtics and the championship and the accolades. 100%, all right, fine. But do you think I'm shedding a tear or crying a river that Tatum coming off of this playoff run and everything that he's had to endure and so on and so forth? And trust me, I know I'm breaking out the Celtic pom-poms here just for a second, but who cares? This is really a story, and I get it. It's a slow period in the sports calendar. I get it that there's nothing else to really nitpick or to discuss or dissect. Nobody's talking about the backup offensive lineman on the Carolina Panthers, whether or not he's going to make the team so he can protect Bryce Young. Understood. But I don't think this is a story that anybody should be wrapped up or have to micromanage or break down to the extent where, oh, this is a big story and what this means for Tatum having a chip on his shoulder to go out to win another title next year. What does the Olympics have anything to do with the NBA regular season and playoffs? Can we start there? It's an absolute farce. Can we just stop already with that? And I understand I put this on my channel. I'm going to have to put this in a snippet and have this as a little excerpt on my YouTube channel at JReels, of course. But this is just much ado about absolute zero. Stop. And I'm just going to leave it right there. Seriously. Zip the lip. As far as the U.S. women's team, they win another gold. They're 8 consecutive. Good for them. Now, they had to sweat it out against France. And mind you, the men's team had to beat France. And I thought it was an interesting storyline with Victor Wembanyama. I talked about this the other day, and it's moot now. But I thought that if Wembanyama, who had a real good game, what he scored, 28 points, 11 for 18. But if they would have won that game, his legend would have begun. Now, granted, I don't need to say any more because I'm sure as he gets ready for his sophomore year in the NBA and has plenty of his basketball life ahead of him, I thought that by winning the gold and beating the U.S. would have been the start of his legend. But I guess we have to pause and wait to see when that's going to happen, more so on an NBA stage than on an Olympic stage, where in 4 years, as we all know, it's going to be in L.A. But for other news and notes, I know Jordan Chiles, because of a scoring issue, really, this is what's happened here. As far as her not winning a bronze, all right. Do I really need to get into that? Or even Noah Lyles had 102 fever, had COVID, and putting other racers and his competition in jeopardy. Listen, the Olympics are over. It's done, kaput. And I get it. People are saying, man, Jay Reels, you're really hard on the Olympics. You really do not give a damn. You really just could care less. Sadly, yes. And guess what? When the Winter Olympics come in 2026, when we're going through the Sports Dead Zone Part 1, I'm going to say the same thing. Because I'm not going to be wrapped up in the ice skating. I'm not going to be wrapped up in the figure skating. I'm not going to be wrapped up in the skiing, even the hockey for that matter. Nothing. It's the same deal. If you've listened to the podcast and it's been going 6 years plus, 6.5 come September 1st, I've had the same theme for each Olympic, winter or summer. Not invested, not gravitated toward any of the storylines, whatever. And it would have been a storyline if Serbia, who had U.S. on the ropes, if they would have beat them in the semifinal game. I would have talked about that until I'm blue in the face. But because the U.S. won, big whoop. So what? The U.S. were expected to win, as I talked about 2 weeks ago today, or even before that in the Thursday podcast when I was in Miami prior to the start of the Olympics. So that's all I have, people. The Olympics, that's it. Washed hands. On to the next. All right, let me get to the helmet and shoulder pads as I put on for the NFL. Takeaways from the first preseason week. You know I didn't watch. I wasn't on top of it. Yes, I did see some storylines. How Caleb Williams performed well in one drive that he had against the Buffalo Bills, who people are already talking about, oh my God, should there be concern about the Bills and how they performed in their opening preseason game against the Chicago Bears? If that's a story, then boy, I guess I got to go back talking about the Olympics, because for anybody to get wrapped up in, oh my goodness, how the futility of the Buffalo Bills in their first preseason game, that the Bears went in there, oh, stop. Find another storyline, find another angle, find something else that you could dredge up to really fully roll up your sleeves and get into, because that, my friends, is not one that I'm going to even unpack, let alone even scratch the surface on. So let's move from there. And the same also applies to Jayden Daniels. I know he had a good series against the Jets there on Saturday. Kudos, great, congrats. Let's see it in a real game come September 8th if they are going to be under center to start their season. And then I could really take a look at, with first team defenses and blitzes coming at them left and right, and not having to deal with second team units on the other side. None of it. When the games really count, wake me up, as I said time after time. And then, yes, I get it that the kickoff rule, a lot of people aren't on board with this, that even the other day, what was that? I believe in the Kansas City-Jacksonville game, you had a safety there to start the game, or at some point in the game. Listen, when the XFL a few years back, and pretty much they're adopting the same type of kickoff rule, I actually liked it. Now, I guess the NFL, there's been a lot of moans and groans, even dating back to the Hall of Fame game, what was it, about 10, 11 days ago? But listen, the kickoff needs some resuscitation. Touchbacks, they're boring. And people can say, well, just start on the 20 or 25. How silly is that? You want to have kick returns, and I get it. Safety of the game, player safety. They don't want guys sprinting 40, 50 yards down the field, and then with the car collisions of humans there at the 10, 15, 20 yard line, etc. I understand that, but give it a chance. Give it a shot. And this is coming from a guy who's a traditionalist. But watching that 4 years ago with the XFL, I actually thought it was pretty exciting. And it adds another element to the game when it comes to kickoff returns. Because if that's going to be the case, let's just start on the 25, it's silly. It's boring. It doesn't add any intrigue or drama. And yes, one more time, I get it. We want to protect the player safety. All right, you want to protect the player safety, go back to 16 games instead of thinking about playing 18 games. How about that? But anyway, I digress. Then you have the scenario with Jerry Jones and CeeDee Lamb. Do I really need to get into this too? Is this going to be a takeaway? How Jerry Jones is saying to CeeDee Lamb, you're missed because he's been holding out. He wants to get the big bucks a la Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill when he restructured his deal, and DJ Moore and all these other guys out there. And all right, that's his want and that's his prerogative, but of course he's going to get fined every day because he's under contract, etc. But again, if you're a Cowboy fan and you are watching this story unfold, all you have to do is just roll your eyes and just hope to pray that one day whomever is going to run the Cowboys once Jerry Jones transitions, and I'm not trying to wish that on him by any means, but we all know, because Jerry wears all the hats. He's the owner, he's the GM, he's the pseudo head coach, he's the accountant, he's the head of marketing, social media, also concessions, the head car parking attendant, you name it. Considering he's going to wear all these hats, things aren't going to change in Dallas. It's going to be the same song that you've listened to over the last 28 years. Which is going to be a three-ring circus, which is going to be Dak Prescott's contract, which is going to be all the headlines on First Take, which is going to be everything that's going to be wrapped up and consumed. But for me, I bring it up now only because I want to get it out the way and move on to other things, because that's part of these takeaways here, although it has nothing to do with what happened on the field, but off. So I digress. JuJu Smith Schuster released by New England. Kind of wonder whether or not he'll go to Pittsburgh because of the whole Brandon Ayuk. Now, obviously, he's not Brandon Ayuk. And Schuster, who came up in 2017, and although he's been in the league now, 7 years, but would the Steelers even revisit bringing JuJu back? He's going to come a lot cheaper than Brandon Ayuk, And I understand he doesn't have the explosiveness, the speed, etc., but he does have good hands. Is he willing to come back to Pittsburgh on a sweetheart deal? Then you know what? That'd be great. If not, then who knows what's going to happen with Ayuk. Obviously, that has calmed down considerably, so those waters have not been choppy. It's almost been pretty much at a standstill since I talked about it last week, so who knows what's going to happen with him. And Tashaun Gipson, the former Jaguar, who's now going back to Jacksonville, as the last 2 years he was a member of the Niners. With the signing of the Jaguars, he's not going to play until week 7 because he violated the league's PED policy. So although he was a member of that Jacksonville team that went to an AFC Championship game against the Patriots back in the 2017 season, he'll be part of their secondary after 6 games. So you'll see him suit up there in Jacksonville as they try to rebound from a just terrible finish there to their season after making the playoffs a year ago. So that's what I have with the NFL. Now let me get to the college football as I continue to keep the helmet and shoulder pads on. I'm only bringing this up because when I read this headline, I had to laugh. And laugh not only because of what the headline stood for, but because this is literally not only the University of Michigan, but Jim Harbaugh putting up not only 2 middle fingers, but 100,000 middle fingers when they opened up their season against Fresno State on August 31st. Because yes, people, guess what? Here's the headline. No clickbait. Jim Harbaugh is going back to Michigan. But as an honorary captain in light of their opening game to celebrate the national championship of the Wolverines last year, as we all know, against the Washington Huskies. And because Fresno State, Saturday, they'll have that time off considering that the NFL preseason will be done and the college football season will commence. And for Harbaugh to get back to the big house, 100,000 strong, to celebrate the national championship of what took place there in the middle of January, just what, almost 7 months ago, or roughly 7 months ago, and for Harbaugh to come back as an honorary captain, although he has been suspended by the NCAA because of violation of what happened in 2020 with the whole COVID and buying lunch for players during recruitment, and that's on the heels of last year with sign stealing from some games there early on in the season, so on and so forth. But doesn't matter because he's coming back. Not as a member of the University of Michigan or to come back in any way, shape, or form as part of the administration. Because remember, he's suspended, but no, he's being invited as an honorary captain to come back to celebrate and one more time to put up all the middle fingers to the NCAA to say, ha ha, guess who's back in the house to celebrate. It is an absolute joke. I mean, this is just, oh my goodness. We know college sports is going in the toilet and has been in the toilet when it comes to recruiting and things of that nature for eons. But now to have this, and this is just continued smug, more so on the University of Michigan, but they knew what they're doing here. And Jim Harbaugh, you think he's going to pass up on this? This is his way to really just stick it into the NCAA right up their rear ends. And, typical Harbaugh. I'm Jim Harbaugh, and you're not. We're the University of Michigan, and you're not. That's just where we're at here, people. I don't even know what else to say, but that is one story that I saw, I laughed, and I figured out, let me just bring it up and have a little fun with it, although it's not fun, if you ask me, because I can't stand Harbaugh. I do not like Michigan, and I guess they're probably sticking it to me, too, as I'm discussing this. And then lastly, before I conclude, some sad news in the world of sports, and this one in particular, golf, as I break out the golf clubs. Chi Chi Rodriguez, I'm sure a lot of people know that name, otherwise known as Juan, or I should maybe say it the other way around, Juan Rodriguez, otherwise known, or most famously known as Chi Chi Rodriguez, died over the weekend at the age of 88. I believe one of the, if not a politician, but somebody from the island of Puerto Rico had announced that over the weekend, and no cause of death as of right now, at least it's unknown, so who knows what had happened to Rodriguez here that caused his demise. But Chi Chi Rodriguez, who is a Hall of Famer, now more so for what he did on the Seniors Tour, because he did win a couple of major titles, 86 with the Senior Players Championship, and then a year later winning the Seniors PGA. But really why he's a Hall of Famer is because he was a character. He was a guy that after sinking a putt, you see him there using his golf club as a sword, the swashbuckling attitude that he had, or even putting it as a holster in a gun after making a big putt. And you also see him maybe shaking hands, but in this case, he attempts to shake hands, but then he lifts up his leg, and the person that he's about to shake hands with, they lift up their leg too, and they shake their pant leg or shake their ankles. The guy was a character. The guy was good for golf. And even though a lot of the younger folk may not know who Chi Chi Rodriguez is, I'm sure you could go to YouTube and look him up, but unfortunately dies at the age of 88. Hall of Famer. You could question whether or not that's the case, but again, a lot of that has to do with his attitude, his effervescence, infusing some life into golf. And we understand golf, you don't really see players like that. We understand that that is a couple of generations ago where maybe they would show some life, show some spirit, show some character on the golf course. Usually it's just a wave, pick up the golf ball out of the cup after sinking a putt. But for Rodriguez and for what he did for the game of golf, especially at the time that he played, thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Rodriguez family, to the golf community, etc., on him transitioning at the age of 88. And that's what I got, people. I told you, Sports Dead Zone Part 2, NBA, nothing cooking, NHL, nothing cooking. I know US Open in a couple of weeks with the tennis, nothing going on with golf, as all the majors have concluded, as well as this podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. One more time, take a listen to my interview with Keith McPherson, WFAN, a very candid 1 hour talking about his bumps, bruises, even trials and tribulations to get to where he is, but it was certainly a journey that is worthwhile and a lot that you could glean and take away from, not only if you're trying to carve a path in a podcast host or sports talk show host realm, but just whatever it is that you're trying to pursue in life. This is one you definitely want to listen to when it comes to determination, when it comes to dedication, when it comes to the universe, when it comes to sticking to your craft. So please take a listen. Apple, Spotify, jreels.com. Of course, the channel on YouTube at jreels. And as well as drinkolipop.com. Please, people, go ahead. 15% off your order by using the promo code jreels. I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate that. As well as subscribe, rate, review on your favorite podcast platform, as well as my YouTube channel at jreels. If you want to send a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following: Instagram, Facebook, and as well as TikTok, the JReels Podcast, Twitter, X, JReels1, just the number, the old-fashioned way, the JReels Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, talking sports since birth, carving out a path, trying to blaze my own trail in this space as a full-time content creator, as you know, trying to do whatever it takes to get the word out, get the name out, get the podcast name out. And that's why I need your help and assistance, people. So please spread the word to all of the sports fans in your life, casual or diehard, because you know I will continue to deliver the passion, fire, fury, energy with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JReels Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And happy birthday to my brother, Victor Carrillo, out west. Speaking of South Central, until next time on the JReels Podcast, peace, love, and God bless everybody. On the flip, baby.